All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Agricultural and Seasonal Workforce Services Advisory Committee. My name is Dan Zeitlin, and I'm the Policy Director at the Employment Security Department. This meeting is being recorded. Please be advised that your image and voice will be captured and recorded during this video conference. Your participation in the video conference equals consent to be recorded. I'm going to turn things over to our committee executive assistant, Vicki Carlson, who will take roll for the meeting. Vicki.
Thanks, Dan. John Devaney.
President, good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John. Mike Empler.
Here.
Hi, Mike. Delia Pena.
Good afternoon, I'm here. This is Delia.
Delia. And Victoria, ready? Okay, Edgar Franks. Michelle Basso alerted us that she would be absent today. Rosalind again. Jeff Pearl.
Here.
Hi, Jeff. And then our executive members, Ignacio Marquez.
Here.
Todd Phillips.
This is Juan Gomez-Briseño from the Office of Environmental Health and Safety, representing Todd. He's going to be running a few minutes late.
Thank you, Juan.
Thanks.
And Uriel Inenguez.
This is Carmen Rivera on behalf of Uriel today.
Thanks, Carmen. Okay, and circling back around, Victoria, ready? Edgar Franks. Or Rosalind again. Okay, Dan, we currently do not have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Vicki. So we don't quite have a quorum yet. Hopefully we'll get to one. Vicki, if you can pull up the agenda, thinking perhaps we can, given that we've got a lot on the agenda and only a couple hours here, unless there are objections from committee members, maybe we can shift things around a little bit and jump into the presentation pieces of the agenda. So per usual, our first item would be approval of the meeting minutes, but we'll need a quorum to do that. We also have on tap an update on the charter, which could lead to a vote on a final charter. So we would want a quorum for that discussion as well. Bertha, are you and your team ready? Maybe we start with the office update.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so we'll then set aside the meeting minutes and the charter and see if we get a quorum. We'll return to that later after a break. Unless there are objections, we can have Bertha and her team do the ASWS office update. And then we have our WACARES, which is the Washington Long-Term Care Program staff here again to brief and discuss implementation of the exemption from that program for H-2A workers. We're scheduled to take a break at 2:10, and then we want to make sure we have plenty of time in this meeting to, and hopefully a few more attendees, dig into what we want to have on our agenda for our meeting in March, which will be our first in-person meeting in a very long time. And so we'll want to work together on key topics we want to discuss there. We'll leave time for public comment at the end. And then our aim is to adjourn at 3 today. So Vicki, let me just do a check with you. I don't think anyone else hopped on yet that would give us a quorum. So why don't we, Bertha, why don't we start with you? I don't think anyone jumped on while I was speaking there, and we'll keep an eye out to see if we get other voting members on to establish a quorum.
Thanks, Dan. I didn't see anybody join either, but I'll keep my eye on that. Good afternoon, everybody. We have an office update as usual. So Vicki, if you could please advance to the next slide. Perfect. And I see that in our slide deck, our FLC update is first, and I think that's fine to start with that. And I'll come on when it's my turn. So Petra, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bertha. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Petra. I am the FLC lead. Today, I'm going to be reporting out on the FLC H2A data. Could you continue with the record? Okay, sorry about that. I got confused with the recording thing. And I don't see the next slide. Are you guys seeing anything? I am not.
We're not. I think Vicky
No,
may
not
be-
seeing anything.
Okay, I could start with the report. So as of February 10th, we have received 193 H2A applications that have been processed, with total workers requested of 17,804. 11 applications of those have been withdrawn or denied. Total workers requested of 2,191. Contracts that have commenced are 48, with total workers requested of 2,908. There has not been any contracts in possibility as of yet. There are 55 active job orders with a 3,277 workers requested. On the right side, there's the information for last year's. Any questions on this so far?
So why don't we pause there for a minute? Vicky was able to get the slide up and give people an opportunity to digest the numbers.
Yeah, this is Mike Kempler. The contracts that were withdrawn and denied. Can you give us an idea of how many, if any, were denied?
So there was 2 denied by DOL, and 9 of them were withdrawn. Due to the new rule, there's been some changes, and there's some information that the employers have put in. For example, joint employers, now that they provide more than 35 hours, they have to have the single application. So those applications have been denied, and they withdraw it, or they resubmit. So that's one of the major things. And another ones are they just entered the wrong information and too many items to fix. DOL will tell them that they need to withdraw the applications and resubmit it.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
This is Rosalinda. I have a question. What will we be able to know in the future which ones are resubmitted, or will they just come in as brand new applications?
They do come in as a new application. We don't have on this report, we don't have something that says which application was renewed, or excuse me, resubmitted. But for us, for the SWA, we can see who resubmits, meaning the employer will take off or add whatever language was needed or whatever the case is.
All right, thank you.
Of course. If no other questions, Vicki, would you please go to the next slide?
Well, this is Rosalinda again. I would just like to comment. I mean, on the bottom where it says the numbers reported are not reflective of the number of foreign workers that arrive in Washington State, which is still like, I wish there was some way that we would know that. I know I say that over and over again, but so we don't really know how many workers are actually here right now. Am I wrong?
That is correct, Rosalinda. We do not. We the FLC team have attempted to collect that information. We asked the employers to provide us that information. Not everyone participates on that. So that is correct. We do not know the exact amount.
Is there a way to get the amount, the numbers that you do get? Can that be reported?
We can definitely provide that, but it's very, very small amount of employers that participate on that. Very small.
I would still like it to be shown on the record.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nah, you're welcome. Next slide, please, Vicki. And this slide, it shows a graphic of the main application holding offices. This will tell us how many workers requested have been on each office. For example, Yakima has 3,267 and so on. You can see the rest of the offices. That's all from my part. If there's no other questions, thank you.
Thank you, Petra.
Well, this
Oh.
is Rosalinda. I just want to clarify something in my
Sure.
brain here. I missed my regular coffee, so I'm a little slow. I'm waiting for it to kick in the middle of the day. But when you say main application holding offices, so these are the offices that are holding the actual applications are designated for these offices, correct? Is that what that means?
That is correct. They're the application holding offices, which
Right.
means that the job order was created and maintained and referrals are made from these offices to the contracts, the job orders that they hold.
And the number of workers is a number of workers that are listed in those applications per office.
Correct. The number of workers requested by the employer per office.
Right. So we still don't know how many of those workers are in those areas yet. We only know these are requested workers.
Correct.
So is it possible to get another line in this chart that puts in the numbers that we do know that have been reported by employers? Even if they're very low?
I don't know if it would make sense to put it in this graph. I think we'd have to report it separately. The reason is because there's such a small sample size. As far as data regarding the actual number of workers present, we could probably get pretty close by comparing the number of workers requested versus the number of applications withdrawn, versus all of those things, but it wouldn't be an exact number because we don't have a mechanism to collect that data other than employer reporting. As I said, I think we could get close to an approximate number, but we couldn't represent that number as, the ESD's position that this is the number of workers actually present.
But you do have the number of workers that the employers are reporting.
From the employers that do report.
Right.
And I said there's not a requirement for them to report, and as such, it's on a voluntary basis, and we have a very small share of employers that do self-report the actual number of workers. When we do site visits, we're able to count, but that is how ASWS would collect the data.
Why is there a problem reporting in this chart the number of workers that the employers are self-reporting?
Well, you could add another row. We definitely have to qualify it, by stating that, I'm just making this up, like only 5 employers reported or something like that. So,
well, that's, yeah.
I
And also qualified by the fact that this is a voluntary reporting mechanism, right?
Yeah.
It's not required, but it would still be good, in my opinion, to see how many workers are actually being reported. How many actually employers are reporting? I don't know, is Edgar or Michelle or Victoria are on, but I would just like to have that visible, because I would like to try to figure out a way to increase it.
increase the number of employers who report, you mean?
Voluntarily, yeah. I mean, that's I think part of this committee is to try to build relationships and understand how we can all work together so that we can see the reality. And this became, for me, very clear, when the pandemic hit, to actually understand in climate crisis and these issues, to know where the workers are and how many are actually in the state. So I would like to try to build collaborative work with the industry and the growers to be self-reporting this information so we can work together to prevent injuries and deaths and, protect the workers better.
Okay, I'm noting this for March. We will I think we'll look at this graph, decide if it's the best way to continue to report this information, and add the additional information that we have. So stand by on that, but we will we'll make the modification for March.
Thank you, Berta.
Any other questions about applications or proportion of workers requested per order holding office? Okay, Vicky, next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it over to our compliance supervisor, Margarito Cabrera, for a compliance unit update.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present updates on site visits and number of workers contacted for January 2023 and compare some data from last year. Next slide, please. This slide shows site visits by county in January 2023. Very few countries started in January, and since we usually do the site visits 2 to 3 weeks after the H3 workers arrive, we did not do many visits in January, but February is going to be a very busy month. The graph on the right shows the number of workers contacted, and last year January 22 versus January 23. Last year in January, we conducted 4 site visits and 8 visits this year in January. Next slide, please. And this is workers contacted. The map shows workers contacted by county during the month of January 23. And the graph on the right side shows total workers contacted in January 22 versus January 2023. Last year in January, we contacted 33 workers versus 276 this year in January. Next slide, please. And this chart shows contracts received by month in program year 2022 versus 2023 from October up to January. The light blue bar shows contracts received last program year, and the dark blue bar shows the number of workers, the number of contracts received this year. For example, the graph, for example, last program year in December, we received 68 contracts and compared to 74 in December of this program year. And on the right side table, we can see the total number of contracts received up to the end of January. Program year 2022 received a total of 144 contracts and 165 in 2023. And that's the total for the months in the chart. And that's only worker requested. And let's see, so program year, since we received total 144 contracts, 665 in 23. So as you can see, it's a 10% increase of the total number of applications received from last year versus this year from October to January. So that's a 10% increase in applications. Next slide, please. And this chart shows work requested by month in program year 2022 versus 2023. Again, the light blue bar shows work requested in 2022, and the dark blue bar shows work requested in the current program year. Last year, 12,731 were requested, and this year, 17,041 workers were requested up to the end of January of this year. We can see that we had 10% increase in contracts, but 34% in contracts requested. It seems like they are requesting more workers per application this year.
And Margo, if we can pause, I see a question in the chat from Mike Gempler stating, and this may be a question for Petra since it's a applications question. The ASWS report showed apps down over last year. Which is it? Mike, do you want to expound on that?
Well, yeah, I was noticing that, unless I haven't had enough coffee myself, but the report, the slide showed that we were actually behind activity in 22 in Petra's presentation. Am I correct on that?
I don't think so. Petra, can you, and we can go back to Petra's slide if we need to. Petra, can you respond to that? And Petra, if you're talking, you are muted.
Berta, she stepped out for a little bit.
Okay.
She just
Olivia, do you want to take that?
Or can you?
Well, if not, we can look at it later. I just want to make sure I know which it is. Are we behind or increasing? We can. I'm interrupting the flow of the presentation.
It's okay. We are increasing, and we could take another look at that slide, but we are up from applications at this time last year.
Very good. Yeah, I'd like to before the meeting's over, take a look at that slide. Thanks.
Noted. Thank you.
Yeah, we can take another look, Mike. It might be that, and this is on us, the slide that Petra was showing goes up to February 10th. So maybe it includes some February, which is the issue here, where this stops in January. But in any case, we can take a look in the break and make sure we've got the right numbers for October, November, December, January without counting February and see where we're at.
All right. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Go ahead, Margo. Sorry.
No problem. Next slide, please. And this chart shows complaints received in January 2022 versus January 2023. Last year, we received 0 complaints in January, and we received 3 this year. Next slide, please. And in the chart on the left show complaints received by type of allegation. From the 3 complaints received in January, 2 were for retaliation and 1 for wage related and supervisor misconduct. And in the chart on the left shows the status of the complaints by the end of January. That's 3 complaints were in progress by the end of January, and 0 resolved and 0 referred. So the 3 complaints were in progress at that time. So that's all I have.
Can I ask how do we know, how do we find out how they were resolved? What were the resolutions?
So I believe that we agreed as a committee that we would present, the ESD would present that information on a quarterly basis. You'll recall that late last year we did a complaint presentation. I think it was actually November. Actually, no, I think it was in October. And Rosalinda, I know you made a comment about this at our January meeting, and those slides were forwarded again to the committee. So we do plan to report out on a quarterly basis. The type of data you can expect is whether they were resolved, if they were referred, and where they were referred. As you know, when we refer them to an enforcement agency, we do have a follow-up obligation. But as of now, for the data that we're reporting for only January, all 3 of our cases are in process, meaning that there has not been an outcome yet.
Okay, thank you for that reminder.
No problem. Thanks, Mago. I think I am next. Okay, next slide. So just very briefly, my office update this month is much of what you've already heard. Number 1, that our site visits are underway. Our compliance staff performed the site visits that you just heard about from Mago in January. We have quite a few contracts starting in February, so we see that there's going to be substantial increase this month in site visits, and then obviously as we get into the season. We did update our standard site visit notification letter. As you recall, this is the letter that we send to growers to give them some information about what to expect from our site visit, give them information about how to schedule it with us, etc. We added some language emphasizing to the employer that this presentation is also for US-based workers, and that we want to speak with US-based workers and that they be also available for the site visit. January was a big training month for both of our teams. Specifically, we attended, all compliance staff attended the GS Long WAFLA Ag Labor Law Academy in various locations. We also received training from the L&I Labor Standards team, both about labor standards generally, and also specifically a hour-long segment about farm labor contracting licensing in Washington, what the requirements are, of what compliance entails, and what to do if we come to know that a farm labor contractor is either operating without a license or is not otherwise in compliance. Our FLC team has focused specifically February, so the last 2 weeks, in making internal process improvements. The objective of these is to increase our accuracy, our uniformity of review, and our efficiency. We're developing systems to mitigate mistakes and be more responsive to applicants. We attended all staff attended the WAFLA Summit on the 12th of January. We presented at that summit twice. We had 2 sessions. And I attended the Washington Growers League conference in Yakima last month, and we presented at that as well. Next slide, please. So the big news that I want to share with you, and I hope that you'll be very pleased to hear, is that the US DOL Wage and Hour Division is going to be in Washington to do the H-2A Employer Roundtable Forum. If this is sounding familiar, it should, because in your 2022 report, advisory committee report, this is recommendation number 6. And recommendation number 6 emphasized that requested that ESD be engaged in planning a roundtable ag forum. Before the pandemic, the wheels were already in motion and planning started, and then it came to really a screeching halt. And since then, since our last meeting, we have a date. It's going to be April 13th, 2023, from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We have a venue, the Red Lion Hotel and Conference Center in Pasco, and ESD will be coordinating the registration. And that process will be to be announced, as we're still working on what the best options is to register what we think is going to be a large volume. The next slide is also about the roundtable forum, so I'll entertain questions after we talk a little bit more. The topics will include mostly federal speakers. ASWS will do a introduction and just a brief overview of the work that we do. The Department of Health will also be talking about housing during that first hour segment. And then it's really the federal government who's going to be having both in-person and virtual speakers. The in-person speakers are going to be the US DOL Wage and Hour Division, including the West Coast Director, which is Ruben Lugo and his team, and our Seattle area team, which is Tom Silva and Stephen Yim. We're going to be hearing from them regarding the implementation of the new rules, common violations, and the Office of Foreign Labor Certification will be attending as well, I believe, in person. Of course, this is Brian Pasternak and his team, which is the director of the Foreign Labor Program. And they will be talking about best practices with regards to the applications and the certification process. There will also be a speaker from USCIS, which is the Citizen Immigration Services. This is the department where growers petition for the visas for each individual. And also speakers from at least one US consulate in Mexico. And they'll be talking about best practices on that end of the process, and will hopefully be also speaking to the recent delays that applicants have been experiencing with regards to scheduling and attending their visa interviews. And then the day will end with a federal and state agency panel. So it's going to be a pretty jam-packed day. A planning committee has been convened by Ignacio Marquez of the Department of Agriculture. And the planning committee will be working on logistics and marketing of the event. This will be a free event. And we're also going to be securing some sponsorships for lunch and those types of things. So this is very good news, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Berta, will there be a
Yes,
public
ma'am.
comment? Will there be opportunity for local workers to speak?
So on the agenda, no. This agenda is really the standard format for all the roundtable forums. They're employer focused. This series is employer focused. So as of now on the agenda, there is not a space for that.
Do you foresee a time when there would be a roundtable that's labor focused?
I do. I don't know a lot about that, but I do understand from the Wage and Hour Division that they do a worker focused version of this. This roundtable is not that, but I do understand that there is another worker focused version. So when we next speak to USDOL, when the planning committee next speaks to USDOL, that's something that we're already that we already have flagged that we want to ask about. So stay tuned on that, but we are going to get the information and hopefully commitment from USDOL to do that version 2 once it's available.
But I mean, labor representatives can attend this.
It's a grower
Roundtable.
focus, but my understanding is, and actually, Ignacio, maybe I better turn this over to you since you're chairing our planning committee and have been really the person in touch with Ruben the most.
Yeah, thank you, Berta. And thanks, Rosalinda, for the question. Yes, we did specifically ask the Department of Labor whether there was anything in the future planned for we're talking directly to farm workers or labor advocates, and he said that they do these forums for labor advocates and farm workers. This one, however, is just for current H-2A employers and any other business that's dealing with the H-2A program. So they are limiting the time and agenda to just that type of training. It's really a jam-packed day already. And so what the purpose is to get employers to understand the rules and stay out of trouble. So So the more time they have to educate them and train them, the better, so that they meet the goal of training them. Now, one of the things that Bertha and I and even Ruben talked about was that they are going to talk about common violations, common things that they see out there. So as an option, I mean, I think that Bertha is more than willing to sit down with labor advocates and just find out what's going on. What do they see? Or what are you guys seeing? And take it to the forum to share with the rest of the attendees. I don't know if that's an option, but that's just something that we can offer.
Well, let's say I wanted to attend this roundtable. Is it by invitation only for employers? So I couldn't attend?
So what we're doing is it is a limited number of people. We have a limited attendance. And we are asking that it is current H-2A employers and businesses.
Only.
We are, so Rosalinda, and if I can respond to this too, and Ignacio, not to cut you off, but so the planning committee has decided to cap the attendance at 150. And the reason for that is because of venue costs and also lunch costs. We are going to be, and excuse me, the other thing I want to say about that is that we are prioritizing growers. And additionally, we are providing a virtual option, especially for state agencies, because we're prioritizing growers. For example, I won't be able to bring my whole staff, but they will be able to participate virtually. So it is a hybrid meeting, and that option will be available.
I guess what I'm asking is, are the labor advocates or the labor representatives on this committee able to attend? Virtually or otherwise?
I believe so. Ignacio, I haven't heard, we haven't discussed anything to the contrary of that. Really, our conversation has been focused on honoring the objective of the recommendation in the report, which the context of that recommendation specifically designates this event as a grower resource, an employer resource. So that is basically that's the boundaries of this event. But as far as certain people or groups or positions not being able to register, that is false. That there hasn't been any conversation about that.
I guess the reason I'm asking is just because we're all on this committee together, and we're all working together to try to improve the whole system and understand the whole system.
Indeed.
And since we're on part of the committee, it would be interesting to see how this is done. Because if we're going to have one for labor, we certainly would want to be involved in that. So it would be interesting to see how this is done, right? How do they present? And that's why I'm asking.
Well, I'll
So
certainly.
Bertha, just looking at the time in the spirit of keeping the agenda going. So Rosalinda, we hear you. Just to reemphasize, as Bertha and Ignacio stated, as the recommendation in the report made clear, this is just a component of employer training. If you want to let us know now that you've got the dates, if you and any of your labor colleagues, the others whom are not, I don't believe, with us right now, are interested in attending in person or virtually, let us know, and we will otherwise, of course, keep the full committee apprised of all the presentations or dialogue that occurred at this meeting. And to Bertha and Ignacio's point, are also happy to work on a comparable farm worker representative forum as well.
I still haven't heard whether I could attend or not, or did I miss it?
Rosalind, I'll defer to Dan as the chair.
Okay.
I think it would be amazing.
Yeah,
if all of our
and
committee
Rosalind,
members-
if you could let us know this date
Okay.
works for you and you want to attend in person or virtually, and also because your colleagues aren't on the call, let us know if Michelle, Victoria, and Edgar are interested as well. We can figure out how to best accommodate that request.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, over to you, Dan.
All right, so I think when Rosalinda joined us, and thank you for joining, Rosalinda, we did reach a quorum. We had set aside both the minutes and the charter portions of the agenda to wait till we had greater attendance and a quorum. In the spirit of keeping the flow going, I'm going to suggest we move next to the WACARES presentation, and then we can look at the approving the meeting minutes, the charter, and dig into the agenda for our in-person meeting in March. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to our colleagues here at ESD, Jeanette Bendham and Jeff Kendall. As a reminder, WACARES, and Jeanette will provide a little detail here in a moment, is a long-term care program in the state of Washington that's being stood up, and an exemption from that program was passed in the last legislative session. So Jeanette and Jeff, we're going to walk through again a review of what the program is, what the exemption is, how implementation is going, and how stakeholder engagement is going. So Jeanette, I see you on camera. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having us here today to talk about this program. We're going to go over an overview and exemption application process. And first off, I forgot to introduce myself, but Dan did. And I'm Jeanette Bendham. I'm the rules coordinator for the Leave and Care programs. And the Leave and Care programs are the WACARES Fund program and the Paid Family and Medical Leave program. And Jeff Kendall is here with me today, and he'll be going over some more specifics of applications later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be going over just a brief overview of the program so we can have a little more context for what Jeff is talking about. Sorry, Dan. I almost put you in the middle of this presentation. So the WACARES benefit, a lot of people don't know what this benefit is and what it can offer. And it is similar to long-term care insurance, but it's not a long-term care insurance program. It's a benefit. Individuals pay into the program, and it was created to support working Washingtonians with affordable long-term care and peace of mind that long-term care coverage is there when they need it. So individuals who have contributed, and the contributions are through payroll deduction, and they've worked for the required period of time, they may be eligible for up to $36,500 of a lifetime benefit. And that benefit can be used for a variety of long-term care services. So employees will contribute 0.58% of wages, and those premiums are collected by employers and go into a dedicated trust fund that can only be used for this program. So those premiums are collected in the same way that the paid family and medical leave premiums are collected, and employers will report and pay those premiums the same way that they do for the paid family and medical leave program. Next slide, please. And I just want to go over a little bit of all of the legislative history here. In 2019, Second Substitute House Bill 1087 passed, which started the design and the implementation of the program. There are 4 different agencies that are involved in this program. ESD will collect the premiums. The Department of Social and Health Services will administer the benefit. The Healthcare Authority will track individual lifetime benefits. So individuals who use only a portion of their benefit amount will still have a balance available to use at a later date if they don't use all of it at once. And the Office of the State Actuary will perform actuarial audit functions, and they'll do a lot of projections to determine fund solvency. In 2020, the Employment Security Department requested legislation that passed, which amended exemptions and some definitions. And then in 2021, Substitute House Bill 1323 passed. That made a few changes to the law, and notably for ESD, it made changes to the date by which private long-term care insurance must have been purchased in order to qualify for that particular exemption. It added additional requirements for self-employed elective coverage, and it added the ability for tribes to elect coverage into the program. Also in 2021, ESD began accepting exemption applications for individuals who had their own private long-term care insurance and wished to voluntarily exempt themselves from the program. And those applications continued through December 31st of last year. So at this point, and that was legislatively mandated for that 15-month window. So at this point, those exemption applications are no longer being accepted. And January 2022 was the original date that employers were to begin collecting premiums from employee wages, but on January 27th, the governor signed Substitute House Bill 1732 and engrossed Substitute House Bill 1733, which immediately delayed the program by 18 months. And it also added the possibility of a prorated benefit amount for individuals born prior to January 1st of 1968. And the date benefits will become available. As I mentioned, the benefit administration is offered by DSHS, and the date benefits will become available was also delayed by 18 months. So that will be in July of 2026. The legislature also added 4 additional exemption types. And that's what we're going to talk about today mostly is the exemption types, specifically 2 of those exemption types that will apply to non-immigrant visa holders and migrant workers. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about all of the exemption types, particularly the last 2 on this list. There are 5 exemptions altogether from the program. And as I mentioned, employees with private long-term care insurance could have applied during the 15-month window, and that was a permanent exemption. We're no longer accepting applications for that exemption. Veterans who have a 70% or greater service-connected disability also have the opportunity to apply for the exemption. And the reason that was passed into law is because those veterans already have a long-term care benefit that's offered because of their disability, because of their service-connected disability. And then spouses or registered domestic partners of active duty service members. These are the individuals who are not in the state, usually for long, and would not pay into the program for long enough to become fully vested in the program. Now, these last 2 are what we're focusing on today. Employees who hold non-immigrant work visas. That doesn't just include the H-2A workers, it includes all of the visa classifications that allow work in the US. And employees whose primary residence is outside of Washington. This would be migrant farm workers who come into the state and live out of state. So these exemptions, as I mentioned, are voluntary. And once an individual applies for the exemption and is approved for the exemption, they don't have to keep reapplying. It's not a yearly application. Once they meet the qualifications and they apply through ESD and we grant that exemption, they are exempt until they no longer meet those qualifications, which is what we're going to talk about here on the next slide. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, these exemptions, 3 of these exemptions are conditional. And the last 2, employees who hold non-immigrant work visas, if individuals no longer meet the conditions that qualified them for the exemption, they do have to provide notification to ESD and to their employer in order to cancel that exemption. So a non-immigrant work visa holder would need to cancel their exemption if they become a permanent resident or citizen. And employees whose primary residence is outside of Washington would need to cancel their exemption if they establish a primary residence in Washington. So next slide, please. So for all of these exemption types, there are certain responsibilities that are written into the law for both employees and employers. Employees have the responsibility to apply for the exemption. These are voluntary exemptions. The legislature did not grant a blanket exemption for this group of workers. And like I mentioned, they don't need to reapply every year or when changing jobs. And employees also have the obligation to provide notification of their exemption, and a copy of their approved exemption letter from ESD is that notification that they provide to their employers, that is current employers and future employers. Employers have a responsibility under the law to maintain a copy of the employee's approved exemption letter, and employers should not collect premiums from exempt employees who've provided the approved exemption letter. So there are certain scenarios where an employer will not get a letter because the employee didn't supply that, and they may have taken some premiums out, and we're anticipating that this is going to happen, but it is specifically written into the law that employees who do not provide a copy of their exemption letter to their employer and who then have premiums assessed and taken out of their paychecks aren't entitled to a refund of those premiums. Now, we're working really hard with outreach and education and how to make this process as easy and accessible as possible for both employers and employees. We've worked with organizations, including WAFLA. We've gotten a lot of feedback from them regarding outreach and have provided information in both English and Spanish on a side-by-side comparison to employers and employees. And that information, Jeff's going to talk about this a little more, but that includes a paper benefit application and information outlining the rights and responsibilities of employees and employers. So employers are incorporating this information into their employee onboarding packets, and they're assisting employees with applications and follow-up. We're working really hard to get this information out there so that we can make this as easy as possible and understand what's available to for educational and informational purposes to employers and employees. So Jeff is going to talk about the application process, employer outreach, more specifically what we've done so far, and our accessibility efforts. Before that, I have one more slide that outlines the requirements for canceling the conditional exemptions. So if you could bump to the next slide, please. So within 90 days of the event that no longer qualifies the employee for an exemption, the employee must notify ESD that the exemption should be discontinued. They also have the obligation to notify their employer that they're no longer exempt and that the employer must begin collecting premiums. If the employee fails to pay premiums within 90 days of the exemption cancellation event, the employee could be subject to pay unpaid premiums with interest of 1% per month directly to ESD. They would then get credit for that time that would count toward vesting into the program. So that's just a brief background of the program. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeff so he can talk a little bit more about our outreach efforts and the application process. Jeff?
Hey, thanks, Jeanette. If we want to go and bump to the next screen, as an introduction, my name is Jeff Kindle. I'm a service delivery manager here for Leaving Care. Specifically, I oversee one of our Walk Cares teams, as well as the operational lead in when we relaunched Walk Cares here on January 1st. Thought I would start out with a data slide, talk a little bit about our application process, and close out with a couple of slides about our outreach and communication plan. So with that, since January 1st, when we relaunched, and through January 13th of this year, we have received 1,038 exemption requests for non-immigrant work visa exemptions, of which 808 have been processed, and 752 of the 808 were approved. Just for your reference, the difference between the 808 and the 752, most of those were denied based on not supplying the correct documentation. Typically, what we do is we have a fact-finding process, and if the applicant doesn't respond to our fact-finding requests, it's denied. They get the letter. They can call back in at that time or resubmit the documentation, and we'll approve it for them. But that's how we got that difference there. The other one that impacts sort of this group would be our out-of-state exemptions. These are folks that work in the state of Washington, but live outside of Washington, so our migrant worker population. We've actually gotten 1,512 of those exemptions submitted, and of which 1,448 had been processed as of 1/13, and 1,272 of those were approved. Again, the difference being exemptions that were not approved for more than likely it was a fact-finding request and their lack of response. So that's kind of where we stand as of 1/13. We do understand we will be seeing influxes of both of these types of exemption requests as soon as the agricultural season starts, and it'll ebb and flow with that schedule of like how our agriculture works. So If you'd like to bump to the next screen, Vicky, that'd be great. As far as our application process, like Jeanette referenced to, we are doing our darndest to make it as easy as possible for folks. We've attended quite a few events and spoke to stakeholders and got their input. And we have two ways now to be able to apply for these exemptions. One is online through a SAW account. That's basically the same way they would apply for unemployment, any other sort of state program that requires a SAW account. You can go in and you can apply. The benefit of doing it through an online SAW account with the state is it's the preferred method because A, it's the quickest, and it also allows our customers to retrieve their approval letter at any time. Without the SAW account, if they need a copy of that letter at any time, they need to call us. We'll be more than happy to mail it to them, but we will have to mail that back out to them at that point. And we want to make sure, to make that as easy a process as possible as well. The second way to apply for this, for these exemptions is through a paper benefit application. And currently, like I said, we prefer the online because it's the cleanest and the quickest. And but for a lot of employers, they want to be able to handle this as part of their HR process. They want to have a paper application that they can, maybe an FAQ page that goes along with it that explains the program to the worker, and they're able to fill it out in their language of Spanish. We're working on getting it in additional languages as well, but right now it's the applications in English and Spanish, and they're able to do that as part of their hiring, as part of the hiring process with their employer. It is available for individuals that basically don't have access or the means to apply online, and for employers that want to include it as part of their onboarding process. Employers can assist the employee with the application this way and help gather the supporting documentation and bulk mail it to us for processing. And then all of the correspondence will be mailed to the address provided on the application, and the employee will need to contact us if they ever needed a copy of their approval letter at that point. There may be the opportunity to set up a SAW account at a later time and link the two things, but as it stands right now, short of having a SAW account, you would have to call us to request a copy of an approval letter or any of the correspondence that we've sent out. We can go ahead and pop to the next one there. This is, oh, please.
We had a question in the chat. Can you see the chat?
Someone point us to where the paper application can be found on this page. It's currently not available on our website, where we do it through direct correspondence. Like if an employer wants to offer it as part of their hiring process, they reach out to us and we send it to them. We are looking into adding it to our website. We want to make it, like I said, as easy for everybody as possible. And we actually have a meeting scheduled tomorrow to talk about that specific issue. But with that being said, it's not currently available on the website, and I'd be more than happy to share back with Dan and Bertha when it is, and they can start sharing that information out as well. All right, so as far as our comms and outreach, so I figured I'd just divide this into who's our audience is and what media are we using to contact them. So our priority audiences are obviously employers, businesses with workers localized in the state of Washington. Even small businesses and self-employed individuals can opt in. And then there's also a lot of third-party administrators and professional organizations that we want to reach out to as far as different types of employers. The specific groups affected by the program would be like specifically the workers on a non-immigrant visa, workers who live out of state and then come to Washington to work, military spouses, near retirees, as well as veterans with 70% or higher service-connected disabilities. So those are sort of our target audiences at the moment. And if you pop to the next slide, I can tell you how we're reaching out to them. Our priority media plan consists of not only our WACARES website, where the employer and exemption specific pages are available now. We're also going to have an employer toolkit available on that website that'll help walk employers through not only the reporting aspect of it, but also those that want to offer it as part of their onboarding for new employees. There's going to be an employer toolkit coming out, because the other piece of this that we cover is the premium reporting and collection of premiums. So, and then we also have FAQs available on that webpage, a contact page if you would like more information. Special alerts come out on there all the time. We also send out an ESD employer newsletter monthly, and a lot of that has been dominated by WACARE's news lately, and we'll continue to do that as long as needed to be able to get the message out. We also send out individual letters to employers to let them know about the program, just in case they're not paying attention to our website or the online newsletter. We've sent out postal mail as well, and also individual outreach to stakeholder groups, which include multi-language printed info and exemption applications, which I just kind of covered. And also outreach is a big thing for Leaving Care right now, is specifically regarding the WACARES program. And to that end, we're really looking at attending as many of these events where we have the employers, basically a captured audience to present to or offer information to. And to that end, we did attend like the WAFLA Summit earlier, or back in January, I guess. And we also are attending agricultural safety days in both Yakima and Wenatchee. We also have done some virtual employer presentations where we'll present to employers' HR departments. And we can do those both in person and virtually. And we also have done multiple presentations for a lot of WorkSource offices that get questions about our programs. We want to arm them with enough information to be able to, answer their customers' questions, or at least know how to refer them to us if they need additional information. And we've also worked with other ESD work streams. Big shout out to Bertha and her team for inviting us to the WAFLA Summit back in January. We shared a table, and it was very productive. Being able to talk to that many employers at all in the captured audience. It was great. But that's pretty much our comms and outreach plan as it stands today. And bear with me, if you see the side of my head, I'm going to look to the chat really quick and see if there's anything I'm missing.
Yeah, Jeff, there's one question in the chat which I can take from Edgar around WACARES funding being used to help H2A expansion. Exemptions have been authorized by the legislature for groups who wouldn't conceptually be able to take advantage of the benefit. So why make a worker put money into a fund when they can't benefit for it later? And two types of workers in that category are H2A workers. If they live in another country, they're not going to be able to take advantage of the benefit when they're older. And migrant domestic workers. If you live in Oregon or Idaho or California and you're coming to Washington to work, and we would be if you're not exempted, we would be taking money out of your pocket for a benefit you'll never be able to take advantage of.
Well said, Dan, and that's perfect. And this pretty much covers what Jeanette and I wanted to share with you all this afternoon. I encourage you all to, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help. And for this group and everything else, if you require a presentation, either virtually or in person, like I said, feel free to reach out. We'll get you on the calendar and see if we can accommodate. So please feel free to reach out at any time.
And this next slide has our contact information also. And we want to make sure that we have time. If there's any additional questions that weren't in the chat, please feel free to let us know.
Any
Thank you,
questions
everybody.
for Jeanette or Jeff? All right, well, hearing none, thank you both, appreciate it. And you all have the slides and their contact information. Happy to answer any further questions you might have as you think about it, or partner in any way that would be helpful. in this initiative. So thank you again.
Can you email us their slide presentation, please?
Yeah, we can do it again, Mike. I sent an email to the group
Oh, then
this morning.
then
and
never
it's
mind.
part of there.
Like, you don't have to do it again. Thank you.
No problem. All right, why don't we do this? It's 8 after 2. I want to make sure that we're able to have a full discussion about what we're going to be doing at our meeting in March. So why don't we take a short break to 2:15. When we come back, we'll see if we can approve the minutes, which we usually do in a quick fashion. And then we'll turn to the agenda for the March meeting. And if we have time, we'll get to the charter. If we don't, we will visit that in a future meeting. So let's break for now for 5 or so minutes until 2:15, and we'll see everybody then. Right, welcome back to this meeting of the Agricultural and Seasonal Workforce Services Advisory Committee. My name is Dan Zeitlin, and I'm the Policy Director at ESD. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and your participation in the meeting equals consent to be recorded. As discussed before the break, we'll turn next to approve the meeting minutes from our January meeting, and then we'll move to a discussion around planning for our March in-person meeting. And if we have time, we'll return to the charter, and we will close the meeting with an opportunity for members of the public to comment. So with that, voting members or all members of the committee have the minutes from our January meeting. I'm happy to entertain any questions or motions to approve.
I move we approve.
Thank you, Rosalinda. Motion to approve the January meeting minutes from Rosalinda Guillen. Do we have a second?
This is Jeff. I second.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Any opposed to approving the meeting minutes?
No, I approve.
All right, the January meeting minutes are approved. All right, Bertha, why don't I turn it back over to you? As a reminder, we are going to have an in-person meeting in March, and Bertha is going to walk through some of the logistical details. And from there, as you'll recall, when we last met in January and started to talk about this meeting, a good suggestion was made to revisit all the priorities that this committee identified in when this committee first launched in the fall of 2019. And so we sent to the committee a list of those issues that were identified and where we, ESD as an agency or the ASWS office, are in terms of addressing any of those priorities. And as Bertha will lead in the discussion shortly, the idea today is not to dig into those details, but just to hear from the committee, including on an individual by individual basis, what 2 topics would you like to deep dive in when we meet in person? For those who were here, you recall when we had that early in-person meeting, we did a very, I would say, productive deep dive into domestic worker recruitment and placement and data issues. Both of which are still ongoing discussions, but being in person really gives you the opportunity to dig into the weeds and have a really constructive conversation. So we wanted to be thoughtful about what issues rise to the top for you as a committee to have on the agenda for this meeting in March. And we will obviously continue conversation about those 2 issues that we discussed in March. And of course, as the committee knows, we've got these in-person meetings quarterly. So we're going to want to deep dive on a couple topics again in the second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter of the year. So with that, Bertha, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan previewed, our meeting next month will be in person. This is the first in-person meeting for this committee since early 2020. And it will be my very first in-person meeting as director of this office. So the details are here. In person, March 15th, 2023, which falls in our 3rd Wednesday pattern. This is going to be a 4-hour meeting from 1 to 5. The location for this meeting will be the Radio KNDA Community Center. Actually, I think it's KDNA Community Center. It's the Radio Cadena building in Granger. The address is there. We will return to this venue for our November meeting. So it'll bookend our in-person meetings that are planned for the year. Our June and September 4-hour in-person meetings will be held also in Granger at the Cosecha Court Community Room. Many of you may know that this is farm worker housing. And during the time of these meetings, there will be H2A and US-based workers residing there while they're working. You'll see that this is a change. We had planned to have 2 in Ellensburg, but we just couldn't get a venue that really embraced the equity criteria that the committee prioritized at the last meeting. So this is where it will be, and then as I said, we'll stay in Granger, but just change locations to farm worker housing in June and September. And both of these venues have been lovely to work with. So I think this is a good spot for us. Do you have anybody have any questions about the schedule or the venue? Okay, great. The objective, of course, is that we will have some farm worker participation at these meetings or presence at these meetings. So I encourage you all to work with your networks to encourage farm workers to attend these meetings. Next slide, please. So there was some prep work for you all that Dan sent out yesterday, and it was a throwback to way back when in October 2019, where many of you that were on the committee at that time met in person and really did a work session, identified 16 total focus areas that you decided were important for the committee to address or in some way unpack. And so when we were starting planning for our March in-person meeting, we decided, and by we, Dan and I decided that we didn't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch and start a new list, that most of the topics already identified in 2019 were topics that were likely relevant for all of you today or at the present time. So these areas, as well as updates to each of these areas, were sent out to you in a Word document with your meeting materials. The updates were provided by the ASWS office, basically very briefly summarizing the work that has been done by the committee in this area. So so as I said, these are the 16 areas. The updates are in your committee materials. We won't post the slide, or excuse me, we won't post that document as a slide here, but for everybody watching, that will likely be posted with our meeting minutes, which will be approved next month. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And one more, please. So our task today, and in the next 15 minutes or so, is to review the committee, or I guess re-review, since you likely have already looked at it before this meeting, re-review those areas as well as the updates, and identify your top 2 choices for topics that you would, of those topics that you would like to have the committee take a deep dive discussion on at our March in-person meeting. The objective of those discussions will be to provide recommendations to ESD about advancing work in those selected areas. The reason that we are only choosing 2 of 16 is because we really want to have sufficient time to be able to have a productive conversation. So in the interest of time and because this is a virtual meeting, Dan and I landed on going around, kind of doing a roll call of our members and having members give their top 2 choices from that list. We'll record that, or otherwise pass if you don't wish to say your choices. So does any questions about what we're doing right now, or any questions about what we plan to do in March before we go around the table, so to speak?
This is Rosalinda. I think since Edgar and I are the only ones here, it's kind of, for the labor reps, it's difficult to give our options when we've got 2 of our folks missing.
Well, we
unfortunately.
knew it, and that point is well taken. We knew in advance that Michelle would not be at the February meeting. We will be reaching out to her to have her provide her top 2 to us in
Okay.
writing, and we can do the same with Victoria. So that will we probably won't be able to, quote unquote, announce what the top 2 are at the end of this meeting, but we'll make sure that we make contact with each and every member so that their preferences are heard.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Great. So I think that, Vicky, if you wouldn't mind calling roll, and I think, Dan, I'll defer to you as the chair. Are we including our non-voting members in this selection as well?
Why don't we first, Bertha or Vicky, if we can maybe go back a couple slides that shows the list so people can look at the list that we're choosing from. Why don't we do on the voting members and then just kind of open it up to see if L&I, DOH, or AG have any, Ag Office have any thoughts based on what they're hearing from the voting members. And Bertha, either I can do that role or you can.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Dan or Vicky, you could do the roll call, and that you can also pass members. I as a lawyer, I know that Socratic method kind of freaks people out sometimes, so I don't want to put anybody under that stress. But you can pass if you want to, or get back to us, or however you want to do that. But Dan, I'll turn it over to you to go around the table.
All right, I will just go alphabetically then. John Devaney, do you have any thoughts on 2 topics you'd like to see covered in the March meeting?
I don't have 2. I was looking through the report on activities we've done since the list was compiled, and the one area where we have not really addressed in great detail is on housing. I actually think that might be something better for one of the subsequent meetings where we're meeting at farm worker housing and can tie that in potentially with a site tour. I do know that housing is a complex issue for employers and employees to manage because there are limitations on eligibility depending on whether you're H2 status or are a domestic farm worker. Employers who are looking to enter the program often find that they have difficulty accessing rentable housing to house their workers in and have to develop it themselves. And that can alter the pattern of usage of the program. So I think aside just from housing funding, which was what was identified in 2019, I think housing supply management and access is something that would be good to revisit. As well as staff capacity at DOH to inspect and license new housing. And as the use of the program has expanded, whether those resources at DOH are adequate.
All right, John, appreciate that input. Next up, Edgar Franks. Do you have 2 topics you'd like to see us focus on in March? If you're not sure if you're with us and on mute or not with us at the moment, let me give you another chance here.
Dan, just a brief scroll through the attendees right now. I don't see him on the list, so he may have had to go.
Okay, and we will be reaching out to, so far, Michelle Besso, Victoria Ruddy, and Edgar Franks to make sure they have the opportunity to give us their input on 2 topics as well. Next, we have Mike Gempler. Mike, do you have a topic or 2 you would like to see us focus on in March?
I would like to see focus on enforcement agency coordination and domestic recruitment.
All right, thank you, Mike. Next up, Rosalinda Kean.
Domestic recruitment and worker complaints. You know what? Scratch that for this time, for domestic recruitment and retaliation.
And Bertha, if it works for you, we've got Delia and Jeff left. We'll do those 2. And then if you have any follow-up questions in terms of like things within those, any of these umbrella topics that we're hearing, you can get those questions answered, and then we'll open it up to the other agency representatives.
Great.
Delia Pena, do you have 2 topics you'd like to see us focus on at the March meeting?
So I think we're already touching base on the employer outreach, which is April. So I would say probably housing and oversight. Actually, I think we should cover it. I agree with John. I think housing and housing inspectors are very few of them, and additional processes that we
Delia, I heard housing. Maybe Bertha caught the second one, but I think you might have said a second topic and I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Was it employer outreach?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Delia, and Jeff Pearl.
I think probably domestic recruitment and housing are 2 big key items I see on the list that would probably be good discussion. Really, all of them would be great discussion, but those 2 kind of stick out to me.
All right, so again, we will reach out to Michelle, Victoria, and Edgar to make sure we get their input before deciding on any topics, not toppings. Bertha, I see housing, enforcement agency coordination, domestic recruitment, retaliation, employer outreach. Any clarifying questions or additional detail on any of those topics that you might want to solicit now?
I don't think so. I think that maybe we should just identify the topics and that people prefer, and then at the March meeting, it'll be on the committee to narrow down and really define the scope of what they want to talk about as to each topic.
All right, Bertha, I think I'm for a brief moment getting booted out of Zoom. So if you want to see if our other agency has anything to add here, and then I'll be right back.
Yeah, definitely. So let's start with the Department of Health. Juan, what 2 topics are you thinking about?
Thank you, Bertha. We're thinking housing and health and injuries.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving
Thanks.
now to the Department of Ag, Ignacio.
Yeah, domestic recruitment, but I mean, I really want to see what how the recruitment for H2A compared to non-H2A. How are we doing? What's the difference as far as how many referrals are we making to non-H2A employers versus H2A employers? And what is our success rate on that too? And also understanding what is our sort of our available pool of workers. Do we have any idea how many farm workers Employment Security or WorkSource is working with, so that we know whether the pool is too small or the pool is already, sort of, I don't know, set aside to employers that they will continue going to work for, not interested in H2A. So taking a deeper dive into that area. And then also perception, finding out what is the perception, what is it that we need to do for the general public to understand about what the H2A program is about and what it's not about. Those are my two. Thanks.
And I actually am going to ask a narrowing question on perception. And I had the same question when I was reviewing the list initially. When you talk about general public, are you talking about Washingtonians? Are you talking about whose perception?
Well, I don't remember exactly why it was listed, but I mean, in my mind, it's for the person that has their sort of opinion of the H2A program, and finding out exactly what is it that needs to be done to help them understand what the program is and what it's not.
So I seem to remember that the whole discussion on perception was the workers' perception on the agencies and how the agencies were enforcing worker protections and worker rights. That's what I remember.
That could be
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, that could be a good topic also. I just wonder what people think about the H2A program, and if it's about, what they think the department, what's the Department of Ag's role in it? What's LNI's role? What's the Employment Securities or DOH?
Perfect. Noted. Okay, moving now to LNI. I believe Carmen is standing in today for Uriel.
Yeah. I was going to ask, did you want to reach out to Uriel for his two, or did you want me to go ahead and just do it on his behalf?
Well, I think it's really up to you. I think maybe we'll have LNI be one of the ones that we'll get back to. So if you could just communicate this ask to Uriel, and we'll wait to hear back from him.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, and let's see here. Is Dan back on the call? I don't think he is yet. Oh yeah, no, he got. Go ahead, Dan. So I think just in closing, we'll reach out to the committee members to get their responses. I see some themes here. So we'll let you know ahead of the meeting what the two topics are, so that you can mentally prepare yourself to talk about them.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
How much influence are the state agencies' choices? How much influence do they have in this versus the members of the committee?
Dan, do you want to take that?
I think your members of the committee's interest is primary. I think if we had getting agency input in terms of what they'd like to see, if we've got tiebreakers to make or certain issues that we're more ready to talk about in March or not. I mean, you could see in this response some convergence on a couple issues, and we'll see what we get back from Michelle, Victoria, and Edgar. And we'll be transparent in how we got to the topics that we did, and we'll also, like I mentioned before, deep dive into additional topics at future meetings as well.
Thank you.
I think another thing that would be helpful, just to open up the floor for the March meeting, is anything else you would like to see occur here. So as we're thinking about our agenda, we would have 2 chunks of time on 2 topics. We have some logistical things to go through. Maybe since we haven't been in person for so long, maybe a moment sort of get to know you a little bit more beyond what we've seen in this virtual room for the last 2+ years. As Bertha mentioned, we're wanting to use this opportunity to welcome farm workers into the room. We picked both time and location in the hopes of doing that. I know I speak for ESD that we're happy to stay late and listen to farm workers. So we'll certainly carve out more than just your usual sort of 2-minute public comment to hear from farm workers on any topic that they think is important for the committee to hear about. Before we move on, though, I just want to stop there and see if there's anything else not subject matter wise that members of the committee would like to see happen in March. All right, hearing none. Bertha, oh, go
Well,
ahead.
no, I was gonna ask about interpretation.
For the public comment, Rosalinda, you mean?
No, during the
Or of
public
the
meeting.
whole or of the whole meeting?
In March, yeah. I was just curious about translation or interpretation, what that might look like, just for the public comment then?
Dan, what, not having been to a in-person meeting before, what does that usually look like?
Yeah, so before, so we did have an interpreter for a member of the committee earlier when we did this. And I don't recall what we did interpretation wise throughout the meeting. Rosalind, if you're asking for somebody to be able to interpret for farm workers during an extended public comment period, we'd certainly be able to do that.
Okay, because we just need to know what to tell workers that might want to attend the full meeting, which a lot of them probably will.
Yeah, why don't we, we're happy to connect to you outside of this meeting, Rosalinda, because I can appreciate the importance of trying to do this right in terms of getting out the message and what this is about and why it's worth their time and what the experience would be like. And you and others on this committee have obviously good experience in that regard. So if you're open to it, we'd love to just partner and figure out the best way to communicate to farm workers what this is about, why it might be worth their time, and what we can discuss with them while they're there.
Yeah, that would be good because this is all about perception. They're
That's
gonna
right.
go and everything's gonna be in English and then except for when they speak. And so
That's right.
you know.
That's right. We can certainly have an interpreter for that portion, and maybe we can work together if there's a message that you or others on the committee would want to send out to farm workers that we can craft in together in English and Spanish that explains what this is. We're happy to work on that with you. John?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. As far as other potential administrative or in-person meeting items, both Michelle and I had a chance to attend the retreat of the ASWS staff, but not every member of the committee's had a chance to meet the broader team, though we've heard from individuals at times on these Zoom calls, though seeing someone's name and looking at their slides is not the same as meeting them in person. So if the travel budget allows, I'd suggest having the ASWS staff present to meet members of the committee.
Great, thank you for saying that. Dan and I will confirm that that is a possibility, although I think it likely is. On that same topic, an important reminder is that as committee members, your travel expenses are reimbursable. Vicki and I are working on a very streamlined process for committee members to submit that reimbursement request. So stay tuned for that. That information will be provided to you ahead of the meeting. And Dan, over to you. I think that wraps up this portion. If there's any other suggestions that you think of, please email me or Dan or Dan. So we can make sure that we are designing a meeting that's not only effective, but also fun.
All right, thank you, Bertha. And yeah, we're certainly looking forward to this meeting and hope that you all are too. Looking at the clock, we've got a bit of time left before public comment. So why don't we go back, Vicki, if you wouldn't mind, to the slides on the committee charter, and maybe I can just speak to the two slides and then see what questions, thoughts committee members have. Next slide, please, Vicky. And so, and just as a reminder, we brought the charter back in front of this committee at the last meeting. We did so because it had been a number of years since the original charter was drafted. So we thought it'd be a good idea, and we have new members on the committee, a good idea to just give it a full look. And we namely wanted to bring the topic of proxies, or as you see here, alternates forward to see how committee members thought about adding new language on proxies, since we didn't have that in the original charter. And we also had some discussion about the public comment period as well at the last meeting. So committee members have a version of the charter and track changes with some other, I'll qualify as minor changes, and then sort of two key ones that we wanted to bring forward here today and see what sort of feedback folks have, or if everyone's comfortable with the charter, we could potentially approve it at this meeting. So first off, on the topic of alternates, we had a good discussion about alternates and the way in which they can serve in the absence of a voting member, and also this notion of bringing some more newer individuals to the table to get an understanding and participate in the committee. It sounded like in that meeting that John had a suggestion that sounded agreeable to the folks around alternate language that he pulled from another charter and shared with us. And I share that with you here. This would be an add to the charter that says any board member may designate a regular alternate to serve on the board in his or her place with the same authority as the member when he or she is unable to attend a meeting. So I think the way that would work in practice is every member of the committee, should they so choose, could let ESD know of an individual who serves as their alternate, and that individual can, as the slide suggests, serve on the board in their absence when they're unable to attend a meeting. Let me just stop on this one and see if there are questions or thoughts about adding this language to our charter.
I like it.
Right. Okay, hearing that positive response, let me move to the other change that we're suggesting. If you go to the next slide, Vicky. So we had some conversation last time as well, as I said, around public comment. Our current charter has public comment being up to 5 minutes, with up to 30 minutes allowed at the end of each meeting. It also has language around time limits on other individuals commenting on the same topic. That's what our charter is for us to do it in this way. That has not been our practice. We did have some discussion about scheduling public comment, or making sure we have enough time for anyone to comment at the end of the meeting. Our suggestion here is to simply update the charter so that it reflects our current practice, which is to have public comment at the end of the meeting for up to 2 minutes. Another individual commenting on the same topic can do so for up to a minute, and allowing up to 30 minutes with two sort of norms. One being that we will strive to end with enough time for the public to comment and members to be present and listening, because we're not going over time, and to per the discussion we just had when we're meeting in person, to create greater space for farm workers to comment over a longer period of time, and for as long as needed for their voice to be heard. So essentially, when it comes to the charter, or ultimately when it comes to the charter, we would simply be revising the language so it reflects current practice. Any questions or thoughts on this?
Could you repeat what you said, that you were open in a public comment for somebody to go over time, to speak longer if necessary?
Yeah, so I think we want to keep the charter to this language with time limited. My point there, Rosalinda, was when we're going to have our in-person meetings, if we're going to see a large number of farm workers wanting to participate, maybe speaking longer, given the unique nature of the in-person event and translation and all that, that as chair, I would be liberal with the time, and we'd want to construct that portion of the agenda and engagement with farm workers in a way in which we ensure their voices are fully heard. So in
That
other
is-
words, oh, go ahead.
That's excellent. I mean, that will definitely help the perception of state agencies and how farm workers' voices are heard. And in Spanish and the way that our community speaks, it takes a little longer to express an opinion sometimes, and they don't get a chance to speak in public this much. So, and if there's nobody, I don't know. I mean, what if there's only one person giving public comment? Are they going to be able to go for 30 minutes? Which they might.
I'm not sure about that. Leaving some discretion to the chair, but
Anyway,
my point being that as chair, we can use discretion when we're in situations like that.
that means a lot, Dan. That really means a lot.
See a hand from John.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think that the public comment language is good. One thing that we haven't really been clear about is if outside members of the public have a agenda item or a broader topic they want to put before this committee for consideration. I mean, obviously we have legislatively tasked items we're supposed to be doing. We've identified agenda items we are actively working on, and we welcome comment on that. But other members of the public or outside organizations may want to tell us that they think there's other things we need to be thinking about that aren't on our agenda. And that maybe is not always best done as a 3-minute comment at the end of a meeting. So I think that we might want to put out some notice on if someone wanted to request time on this committee's agenda to tell us something, or put something forward for possible inclusion in our agenda, how they would do that. Even if it's just on the website saying, if you have an agenda item for the committee, contact the chair. Or whatever it might be, just so that folks know that is a possibility that we would entertain if it's something that we feel merits further discussion and attention.
All right, point taken, John. Any thoughts or comments on John's suggestion there? All right, any other thoughts on our charter?
I'm just going to throw this out there. So I was thinking, like, if a farm worker has an item that they would like to have the committee address in some way or another. I know on behalf of the labor advocates like myself and Edgar and Victoria, sometimes they may want to talk to us first about it. And so would there be a problem if they were referred to a labor advocate to discuss that item? I don't know. It's just depending on, especially in the in-person meetings, they might want to talk to us about it, but we wouldn't do that during the meeting. So I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Why don't we just take John's and that suggestion and see if there's any language worth adding to the charter about public engagement in terms of establishing an agenda. So we'll take that as an action item before we move to approve the charter.
Great, thank you.
All right, anything else on the charter? Okay, hearing none, we'll take that suggestion and come back with a little bit more on the charter in March, or depending on the agenda, maybe even save it for April, and hopefully approve our updated charter soon. With that, why don't we turn to public comment? Do we have Carlos on for interpretation? Afternoon, Carlos, how are you?
Good.
All right, per usual, I will read the script slowly and let you translate along the way. If you would like to make a public comment, please state your name and spell it.
Si desea hacer un comentario público, por favor indíquelo y deletrelo para el capturar en la junta.
That way we can capture it correctly for the minutes.
para poder capturarlo en la junta.
Please also state the organization you represent, if any.
Por favor, también indique o mencione su organización si es que representa a una.
Your comments are being recorded.
Sus comentarios están siendo grabados.
However, if you would like your comments to be included in the meeting minutes,
Sin embargo, si desea usted que sus comentarios sean incluidos en la agenda de la reunión,
please submit them in writing via email to Vicky Carlson.
por favor envíelos por escrito por correo electrónico a Vicky Carlson.
Her email is vickie.carlson@esd.wa.gov.
Su correo electrónico de Vicky Carlson, lo voy a deletrear, es bickie.carlson@esd.wa.gov.
That email is in the chat.
También el correo electrónico está incluido en el chat.
Please limit your comments to 2 minutes.
Por favor, limite sus comentarios a 2 minutos.
We have any public comment?
¿Hay algún comentario del público?
Right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Carlos. All right, so we've got our next meeting, as we just talked about, scheduled for Wednesday, March 15th in person in Granger, Washington, from 1 to 5 p.m. We've got some thoughts on topics to cover in that meeting, and we will engage with Michelle Besso, Victoria Ruddy, and Edgar Franks to get their input as well before finalizing those 2 topics. We'll also look to have an interpreter available for the public comment period, and Rosalinda will reach out to you and see if we can get some thoughts on how best to communicate out to farm workers that this event is occurring, what it's about, and how they can engage. With that, any final thoughts before we adjourn? All right, hearing none, thank you for your participation in today's meeting, and we're adjourned.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you all.